On today's edition of the show, we discuss the Florida Panthers losing to the Toronto Maple Leafs on Monday night, getting a point, one step closer to a wild card spot. But with dropping a point on Monday, it gets a little bit more difficult as far as the scenarios.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Tuesday, April 11th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez. You can follow me on Twitter at Monoman12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers, not only on Twitter, but on Instagram as well. Follow us there. And don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network as well. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So the Florida Panthers, the big game on Monday night, of course, with the Toronto Maple Leafs coming to town, and the Panthers, of course, their magic number coming into the night was 3 to get to a playoff spot. And of course, the Panthers had to have that sense of urgency. And of course, at times in this game, we saw the Maple Leafs not having that sense of urgency. But still, the Florida Panthers come out on the losing end of this one. And this will be a great time to bring in my guest on the show. He has been on this show before. You've seen him on Twitter. And it is Francisco Oporta at FLA Cats History on Twitter, Florida Panthers historian. And Frankie, it's great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, I tried to get Panthers history, but someone had already taken it. I'm sure it was a Carolina Panthers fan, and it's banned on Twitter, by the way. They must have done something horrible with that account. So I couldn't grab that one, thus FLA Cats history, because I couldn't fit all of FLA Panthers in the handle there. So that's why it's called that.
You keep it simple with having it short, so it's easier for people to remember. And one other thing about Francisco is that he's also a Marlins historian as well. It's funny because with dual screening everything on the day, with having the Islanders Washington Capitals game on, I wasn't watching the Marlins game tonight, but there's this awesome thing that MLB app does now where you could track the game on your phone and it shows on your lock screen. So I saw that the whole time that the Marlins were getting destroyed, which that final was 15-3 there. Not a good one for the Marlins. But
I was watching both games, and it was much. You had nothing to look. Don't even look at the score. Don't see what happened. Sandy had a horrible start, and let's talk about the Panthers, right?
Yes, sir.
Thus far, with only one game left on the season.
Yeah, one game left on the season, and let's just talk about going into this game and knowing that Alex Lyon was going to be in the starter's crease once again. The Panthers were were riding the hot cold tender, and it's crazy to think that the winning streak's over, but the point streak is still alive at 7 games for this Panthers team. And we saw the jump that the Panthers had early in this one. They were taking away the time and space from the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I felt like even when they were taking away the time and space for Toronto, as far as quality shots, I thought that the Maple Leafs had more of the more quality shots on Alex Lyon early on. I mean, there's one where Michael Bunting got out of the box after picking Forsing's pocket, and then Alex Lyon makes us stop blocker side. And even then, through 10 minutes, it was 9-3 Panthers. But also the Panthers were getting really in on the forecheck and pinning the Leafs into their own zone. But I really didn't think they were getting too much down low and in the dirty areas as much as I wanted to, even though they got the shots on goal early on.
I mean, the entire game. I mean, the Panthers threw everything and the kitchen sink at Samsonov today. There were so many shots on net. Toronto got down. I thought that. I mean, it seemed like they were blocking more than, and I think they did finish with more blocks today on the Panthers just by sheer volume of what the Panthers were throwing out there. But it's been that the Panthers going back to the MO of just throw everything at the net and see what happens. But to your point, the quality shots. I mean, there were a lot of shots there. There were some like, man, if they had somebody else interested, like get the rebound on some shots there, especially towards the end of the third period as well. Towards the last 5 minutes, they had some good shots that if there was somebody there to rebound on the other end, they could have had maybe a chance at it. I mean, and following on Twitter, all the beat writers, and people that follow the Panthers, Roy Bellamy, people like noticing that the Panthers weren't finishing a lot of chances. And that's ultimately what killed them today, I think. Alex Line was fantastic, was great. What more can you ask for from your goaltender? He, especially like in the third period. I mean, we can go period by period, but like in each period, there was like this key moment where Toronto could have scored another goal and basically put this game away. But he found a way to make the save and keep the Panthers in this game, despite the fact that once again they were throwing so many shots on net to Ilya Samsonov, and but there were key moments in this game where scrums that it's like they had the chance. They were probably like a few inches or like a foot away from scoring goals. I think pretty much every single top scorer had a very good chance of scoring a goal tonight. Like Duke had a fantastic shot at one. I think Verhaeghe had one for himself as well early on in the game. Just a few. I mean, luckily, Brandon Montour is there to clean up because I mean there was that play in the third period. Verhaeghe was trying to pass it off to Barkov, and I guess it kind of caught the skate of one of the Toronto defenseman, and it just happened to find Montour, who was trailing behind. Fantastic for him. He's doing fantastic these last 7 games. I think ESPN he had like 12 points in the last 7 games, and he buried that shot to tie the game in the third. So, he's been fantastic, earning that extension money and everything like that. But the Panthers had chances to finish,
yes,
throughout this game. So, it's just like, man, they're right there. They were just on the doorstep for so many chances. And then the overtime period as well. And
Tkachuk especially.
Yeah, Tkachuk. But then tired legs at the end. Tavares are the bane of Panthers' existence now. Buries it at the end, and that was it. That's all she wrote. So, but fortunately, there were outside factors helping us tonight. Thank you to all the folks up in DC.
Yeah, definitely. And there were also some pretty highlight reel stops. There was one where Alex Line was sprawled out, it deflected off him off the post, and then Brandon Montour bats it out of the net. Not quite like the block that Lucas Carlson had that Lucas Carlson had last year against Carolina, but still a big stop for the Panthers there. And the play that you're talking about with Anthony Duclair, I think is when Matthew Nyes was trying to pass it to Noel Acciari, and then Duke steals it, tries to go in backhand forehand, and then Samsonov just sticks the leg out right before Duke can get it past him. And Gus Forsling, there's a part where he got walked by Ryan O'Reilly, and then a few minutes later he has an incredible back check on William Nylander as he was going to go through three Panthers skaters about to get on Alex Line, but Gus Forsling's there to stop it as well. And just before that, that's when Austin Matthews deflects it home going into the second period. But also, even before going into overtime, John Tavares had a big chance to win this, and for the
Mm,
Panthers to have no points, as Alexander Barkov was stripped right at the trapezoid, and then Alex
yeah.
Lyon was there to hug the post. And honestly, I know they got a point, but it's a very important point. Don't get me wrong, but that was possibly, and even in a loss, that hugging of the post at the end of regulation was possibly season saving for the Panthers.
Yeah, that was, I mean, incredibly surprising seeing Barkov get stripped like that, but Tavares just kind of snuck in there, grabbed it, and yeah, Lion. I mean, so Lion has been saving this season. It's him, Brandon Montour, and Matty Kachuk willing the Panthers to this moment right here. So it's like there's so many instances where like they probably should have lost. They probably should have uh not even be in this position, but they're here now. So Lion has been, I mean, he was amazing. He's been amazing. He's still amazing. What more could you once again, what more can you ask for from your goaltender today? He's, there's something in that number 34 that's powering him, that's for sure.
That's for sure. Of course, going back to 1996 when referring to number 34 when it comes to that. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to talk more about the Florida Panthers. And even though they dominated the possession numbers, the power play in this one for the Panthers was not great for the Panthers. And we're going to discuss more about the out-of-town scoreboard, not only in the Panthers playoff race, but going on outside of it too, as far as the next opponent for the Panthers. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel. And grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back. There's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up and place your bets and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Back on this second segment here on this Tuesday, April 11th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I got Francisco Oporta, Panthers historian, and you can follow him on Twitter at FLA Cats History, where he will be tweeting basically the 29-year history of the Florida Panthers, from their time at the Miami Arena, from their move to Sunrise in the late 90s to even now. So make sure to give him a follow there at FLA Cats History. So Francisco, the power play for the Panthers, I mean, they had a lot of zone time at offensive zone time on 5-on-5, but man, did they struggle in their zone entries on the power play today. I believe they got 3 chances. Double checking right now.
So they only had 2 power plays today.
Yeah.
So they only had 2 power plays, one in the first and one in the second period.
Yeah, second going into the third. And even for the Panthers, zone entries were just a struggle for this team today. And Samsonov only facing 2. But it really all started with the zone entries and the Panthers' inability to get to the boards and go to battle there. And the Panthers, another thing about the power play for the Panthers is that their power play streak ended today at 6 straight games for them, and the lack of quick passing as well on that front is kind of it's kind of frustrating for when you are a team who is, at least on the ice, the team that looks more urgent versus the team that's already locked in. And you could even see it in the Maple Leafs, that not necessarily that they're not trying hard. I don't want to take that away from Toronto, but they're not putting as much energy as they would because of where they are in the standings and them clinching their spot.
I was Yeah, because everybody was playing out the scenarios, especially last week, for what was like the last 4 games of the Panthers. And so we knew it was okay, let's see where the Leafs are at, where the Lightning are at. And then okay, fine, it's locked in. The Leafs will be hosting the Lightning with home ice in the first round. All right, so okay, that's cool. Maybe the Leafs will let off the gas, put in the backup goaltender, all this other stuff. And probably just telling the players, hey, go out there, work on some stuff, work on, trying to, get a feel for the game, that type of thing. Coaches will never tell the players to kind of take their foot off the gas or play easy because they're like, they're afraid that injuries will happen in that sense or things like that. But the Leafs, I, I guess you got to hand it to them that they did play hard and they kept the Panthers honest in that sort of sense. And I think players do play with a bit of pride. Uh, and I guess with an obligation to the other teams out there, like, hey, if we're just gonna lay down and let this team beat us just because we have nothing to play for, then I guess there's a sense of honor to that as well. But once more, I think you were right in the sense that the Leafs did not look urgent in that sense, if at the very least. Uh, and really, it was more the Panthers. We're going to reiterate chances were not high quality.
Mhm.
When they had chances to finish, they didn't. And so it made Samsonov look like a Vezina Trophy winner out there. So
Yeah, and gonna look at natural stat trick about scoring chances and high danger scoring chances. They're almost even. 16 high danger scoring chances to 13 in favor of the Panthers, and that's
mhm.
with almost double the
And
amount.
I would assume, not looking at it right now, but I would assume most of the higher, because I think their quality chances were better in the third period than throughout the first 2 periods, I would assume.
Yeah, for no doubt. And though and it really came down to being the Toronto Maple Leafs just being opportunistic. And I mean, and this is where it's a little bit of a flaw to Matthew Tkachuk's skating at the end. I mean, I know that's not a part of his game that I haven't picked on his skating at all. But this is where you see kind of that flaw towards the end where he's just unable to get to John Tavares. And John Tavares, man,
I think he was
he's
just
so great.
tired, to be honest.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
he was
tired
out there a
too.
long time. Those
Yeah.
just tired legs.
Yeah, I mean, it was also hard for I forget who was on the ice for the Leafs. The broadcast said that they were out there on the ice for like over 2 minutes in that overtime as well, and then John Tavares just is there to save the day for the Leafs there at the end. And of course, when you're 1-on-1 with John Tavares, it's a little tough to make a stop on there for Alex Lyon. I mean, we've seen this since 2016. So going back to
Well, Trocheck
going
was
back,
tripped, so
yes, Trocheck was tripped, absolutely. Going back to that, but
doesn't count.
yeah, absolutely. But going back to out of town scoreboard, the Islanders, they were down from the start, from like 2 minutes in, excuse me, about a minute and a half in, they were down two nothing to the Capitals, and then through halfway the through the first period, down 3-0, they get it down to 4-1, 4-2, excuse me, 3-1, and then 4-2, and then Washington wins. So they do gain a little bit of a lifeline here on the night. How are you seeing how do you view a night like tonight when the Panthers only get a point? Because I'm still I'm still a little optimistic, honestly. Because of that 1 point.
It could have been worse.
Yes.
It could have been worse. The Panthers, they you can't fault them. They came to play. They
Yes,
played.
they did.
They came to play. There was no lackadaisical period that I would say. They threw a ton of shots. Alex Lyon was on his game. 18,000 plus at the arena. Like, everybody did their part tonight. So it does give you some sort of confidence that they can come out and get at it against Carolina to finish out the season. And hopefully because the playoff scenarios are still open right now with the Canes trying to win the Metro Division, the Devils on their heels, the New York Rangers lost today. The Sabres somehow the Sabres are big,
They're
kudos
alive.
on them. It's been a long time for them to have a season like this, and they're still alive. They're still alive. They have more games in hand than everybody else. If they run the table, some miracles can happen for them. But the Panthers, I feel I can't fault them for the effort that they put in. You get an A for effort. That's what they get for tonight. They get A for effort. There were chances missed. They cleaned those things up. Maybe some come out the gate hard against Carolina. They're at home, and just finish some chances. Maybe get some power play goals, and hopefully Alex Lyon doesn't have to stand on his head to win the final game of the season. But it still looks good. I mean, we can look at the scenarios because the Penguins are also with 2 games in hand right now, so they're
Yeah.
sitting back, and then of course the Isles have their final game. So there's stuff happening, and there are teams that are still looking for seeding opportunities. I do not want to see the Boston Bruins.
Neither do I.
They've set the NHL record for wins in a season. Some possible maybe miracle from the sports gods, because in all 4 major North American sports, and we'll see what happens with the Bruins this year, the team with the best regular season record of all time has never won their respective championship. So it's not a given that the Bruins will win the Stanley Cup this year. So there's always a possibility that that could happen. But I would rather not deal with that and let like the Isles or the Penguins deal with that.
Yeah, you think about the 72 Dolphins in football. You think about before it was the Golden State Warriors, it was the Bulls in the 90s for that. So and with that, I mean, it's crazy to think, but I wouldn't want to. I don't want to see Boston either in round 1. That's for sure. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we are actually going to look at the scenarios, and this might be a little difficult to keep up with, but we're going to do our best to go over these in segment number 3. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Tuesday, April 11th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I got Francisco Oporta, Florida Panthers historian. You can follow him at FLA Cats History on Twitter. And it's, we wouldn't be juggling around with talking about scenarios if, of course, they got that extra point. We'd be talking about the playoff spot and celebrating.
So many games that you regret.
Absolutely. And with the Panthers, and for those listening at home, bear with us about what we are about to talk about as far as scenarios.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot. There's a lot happening.
A lot. So Pittsburgh played Chicago on Tuesday on home ice. We are not counting on the Pittsburgh Penguins to lose. I'm not counting on it. And I'm not counting on them to lose against Columbus. But anything can happen. I was saying that about the New York Islanders going into Washington tonight as well. But they get from the jump, they were just outplayed.
Yeah.
But assuming that the Pittsburgh Penguins lose on Tuesday, the Panthers will be in no matter what happens on Thursday against the Carolina Hurricanes, because the Panthers would own that tiebreaker no matter what. If the Penguins lose in regulation on Tuesday. This is where it gets a little bit more difficult. If the New York Islanders win on Wednesday against the Montreal Canadiens, they will be at 93 points in regulation. And the Panthers lose in overtime. The New York Islanders will pass the Florida Panthers, because if the Panthers lose in overtime and the New York Islanders win on Wednesday, that will have the New York Islanders at 36 regulation wins, tied with the Panthers, and they would pass the Panthers in regulation overtime wins. That will be the second tiebreaker there. And it gets a little bit more difficult, where if they lose in regulation on Thursday, they have to have, if two of Montreal losing Wednesday or Pittsburgh losing one of their remaining games in regulation, and or Pittsburgh loses the two remaining games in any fashion, and or add Buffalo to this, Buffalo loses any of the three remaining games in any fashion. And I'm not, as great as Buffalo is as a story, I'm not expecting them to win out the rest of the way. So I'm not too worried about Buffalo the rest of the way, because honestly, it's a win and you're in for the Panthers. Mm-hmm. Honestly, if you lose even in any fashion, even if it's overtime and the Panthers end up making the playoffs, my mindset is you didn't deserve it.
So let's see. I'm going to look at these teams one by one. So we've got the Buffalo Sabres. Let's start with them, because they're the most long shot scenario. But hey, it could happen. They're up against the Devils tomorrow, so they're playing the second night of back-to-back.
Yeah.
So they'll be tired, and the Devils are still fighting for that Metro Division. So correct. They'll be coming.
Carolina lost.
Yeah. So they'll be coming hard for the Sabres there. So that's a very, like, if the Sabres lose, that I would assume that's that stick a fork in them right there. But who knows? And then they have Ottawa. All right, Ottawa's had a nice season, this and that. Maybe they'll have they'll have like a nice little finish, and it's the last home game for the Sabres, so they'll be up to try and win one last game on for their home crowd. And then they face the Columbus Blue Jackets, who of course are tanking. So there's the end of that scenario for the Sabres. It's a long shot, but I would assume if the Devils beat them tomorrow, it's basically over for them.
Yeah, it'll be mathematically over for them.
So, there you go. And so the Penguins, we've already gone through them, Chicago and Columbus. So tank, get better draft position. That's what those two teams are doing. Throw in some young guys and see what they can do. So the Penguins, we kind of have to pencil them in for 2 victories right there. They'll be at 94 points, right? So there you go. And the Panthers can only finish with 94 points as well at this point. And then we have those dreaded New York Islanders at the end, and it's against Montreal. And I think the Habs are, trying to get better draft position, and it's also a home game for the Isles. Man, it's just winning your end, but the Panthers have the toughest competition to try and finish this one out. But encouraging that they were able to stand toe to toe with the Leafs tonight, even though we can kind of say maybe the Leafs weren't completely putting all of their effort today, because they got to save up for the Lightning. And I think the Leafs play the Lightning in their final game of the season.
So they play tomorrow. They play tomorrow on the second of back to back.
Well, that's fun. That'll be fun for them. A nice little preview. They're gonna get at each other, and so the Panthers have the hardest scenario. I would hope. I don't know what the Canes So can we run again what the Canes scenario is to see how much effort they're going to put in for that final game? Because if
Let's
the
see.
Devils win tomorrow, they'll jump ahead of them.
Well,
Correct?
the Carolina also plays tomorrow at home against Detroit. They'll be
Okay, so they're
playing
playing
at
a
the same time tomorrow.
back-to-back. Okay,
So
so
honestly,
go
I'll tell you the
Wings.
truth. I'll tell you the truth. Even though Buffalo's a long shot, wouldn't it benefit the Panthers if the Buffalo Sabres go into New Jersey and win? And because if Carolina wins
They
on
win the
Tuesday
division.
against Detroit and New Jersey loses, at least in regulation, they will, the Carolina Hurricanes will clinch the Metro. And I'm looking at tiebreakers, and right now New Jersey has more regulation wins than Carolina. So Carolina would have to win outright at the moment. Okay. They have more regulation wins and regulation overtime wins too. So the Carolina Hurricanes have to finish a full point ahead of the Devils right now.
Okay. Yeah, whichever scenario gives the Hurricanes less incentive to play hard in the final game. And play hard in the sense, let's not completely empty the tank here against the Panthers and save up for the first round against most likely. Well, that would be a fun scenario too, because if the Panthers can get that first wildcard spot, the Canes would be their opponent in the first round.
Possibly 8 straight against the Canes, starting with that regular season finale.
And they're 1-1 so far this season, and both were opposite ends of shutouts.
Yes.
In those first,
the other one was just the second one was just after Christmas, and then the first one was just before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, these teams haven't seen each other in a long time. Things have changed since then. So it really I mean, do the Canes really want to play the Panthers? The Panthers are kind of hot right now. Maybe it might be in their benefit to try and knock them out. So they're like, okay, we don't have to play them. We just got to play the Pens. I don't know how they did against the Pens or the Islanders. Maybe they did better against those teams. So there's that. There's the other part of all of these scenarios is, do the Canes want to play the Panthers? Because that's who they would face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows? But of course, there's still so many things that could happen. And the fact that the Panthers have 2 days off, I mean, they could clinch before they even take the ice on Thursday. That's the thing.
That'd be awesome.
They could.
Yeah.
Not counting on it. Yeah. But you never know, because this day by day can change, whether it's a clinching scenario or what happens between New Jersey and Carolina. So many things can change in the next few days, and every single day is going to be a different outlook on preparing for Thursday night's game against Carolina. It's going to be a long 3 days right before it. So, Francisco, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, recapping this 2-1 overtime loss against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Wasn't easy. They got a point, one step closer to a playoff spot, and we'll have to definitely bring you back on, whether it's the Panthers making the playoffs or during the offseason, to talk more about what this team needs to do to
we'll talk about the Marlins.
Or talk about the Marlins. Maybe.
If they miss the playoffs, we're talking about the Marlins.
Okay, fine. We'll do that. Maybe we could both join Locked On Marlins. But that's up to Peter Pratt. That's up to him. He decides that, not us. But tell us where you could where everybody can find you online.
Yeah, FLA Cats history on Twitter. You can check that out. You can check out Marlins history if you want to check out the Marlins side of things. And I've got a bunch of stuff. Just follow my stuff on Twitter. You'll find my stuff. I stream and do other stuff like that. But for the most part, FLA Cats history on Twitter. I'll try and post happy things, especially if they make the playoffs, and we can talk about, hey, remember in '96, remember in 2012, and all these other things. So, yeah. Fingers crossed. Let's go.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Francisco, and I'll see you the next time around, all right?
All righty.
And if you like what you're hearing, Please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steele Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen of the day, Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every highlight. Locked On Game to Game brings you an episode on the entire NHL scene from the local experts that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. So I'm Armando Velez with Francisco Oporta, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.